Hi, I'm Steph. I'm currently a second year marine engineering apprentice here at Berthon. We're currently down in the engine room of the 1942 Motor Gun Boat MGB 81. Here is Kev using the A-frame to lift the gearbox into the boat. The gearbox is going in first, as once the engine is in, there is no room to work around it. We are not fixing the gearboxes or engines in place yet, as lots of measurements and lineups still need to go ahead before making the brackets. In a later video you will see the brackets for both the engines and gearboxes being fabricated. When lowering gearboxes and engines into the boat, there will always be spotters up on the deck and in the engine room to stop any swing which could damage the boat, the gearbox or easily damage parts such as pipes.
Okay, that'll do, lock them off!
As you can see, we have Brendan up on deck spotting and operating a crane whilst I am down in the engine room spotting. Once the gearbox had been lowered into the engine bay, we began re-stropping the gearbox for the second manoeuvre to get the gearbox into place. The second strop has been dropped through a soft patch and connected to a second A-frame. This second strop will help pull the gearbox over to the starboard side where it will be lowered and positioned to its final position. This is where we will take measurements before the mounts are fabricated. The port gearbox was installed the same way. This also gives you a good idea as to how the engines will be fitted, but on a much smaller scale. The midship engine is positioned forward of the port and starboard engines with a direct drive gearbox mounted aft of the engine running straight to the prop, whereas the port and starboard engines are fitted with a V-drive setup. This is where the output shaft from the transmission comes out the back of the engine into the gearbox via a drive shaft, with the prop shaft running out the gearbox, under the engine and through the hull. Essentially, the terms direct drive and V-drive refer to the path of the power. This also allows the port and starboard engines to sit further back in the boat to help with weight distribution and space within the engine room. With the gearboxes in place, we could fit the 3 new engines. You may have seen in previous videos where we removed the 3 old man 835 horsepower engines to make way for the 3 new Mermaid Marine supplied FPT C13 825 horsepower diesel engines. Both Berthon and the PNBPT, also known as the Portsmouth Naval Base Property Trust, want to keep MGB 81 as original as possible. However, the replacement engines will be more reliable, fuel efficient and lighter than the originals. The engines were installed in the same fashion as the gearboxes, with even more spotters all around due to the bigger size, and guy ropes were used as well. With the engine in place, over the soft patch we began to lower it in. As you can see, it's a tight squeeze.
Go forward about 12 inches. Right, stop there guys, stop! Well done.
She was then lowered and positioned before the next manoeuvre. This is where it gets tricky. With the size of these engines, deck supports had to be removed and replaced with large jacks to support the deck, as we still had engineers above. These wooden deck supports will be replaced at a later date.
Okay, can you 2 go down? We'll go forward a bit. Just keep going to our shout. One of the shouts stop. Okay? Alright, stop there!
Well, you can hit onto the bottom of the engine room.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to sit it down there. Yeah, I'm sat on this foot there. This one's down. Don't clip them on, just hold that up till that from it so we see the length.
Same as with the gearbox, the engine is being re-stropped to move her further forward into position under the deck.
Hold it there,
The engine is then chocked into position with wooden blocks to hold it in the position before being measured for the new engine mounts. With the mid-engine in position, we then started to lift the port engine. The engine is again lifted above the soft patch with multiple spotters.
Right, Ash.
Yeah, we're good.
Happy stuff?
Yep.
Alright. Come over that way a bit.
Once lowered, the engine is positioned as far port as possible. This is when we had to start restopping the engine through soft patches and the other A-frame. With all tension taken off the main A-frame, the engine is now suspended below the back deck and almost in position.
Put a strop around that outer girder.
Yeah.
Over to this forward foot. I've got a chain left down there for winch it and twist it around.
Yeah.
With it over as far as the soft patches would allow, it still wasn't enough due to the size and position of original engines. A block and tackle is attached to draw the forward end of the engine in towards the centre.
That move in. We went 12 inches. If we go 12 inches from the centre directly across.
A second soft patch had to be cut to allow an additional strop to pass through to draw the engine over that final 12 inches.
Running out of room on the shackle.
With the engine roughly in position, she was chopped off. The third starboard engine is being fitted the same as the port engine. It will be lifted up and lowered through the main soft patch and hauled across into position.
Just take that ring on up, Steph.
Here you can see the correct engine feet being fitted as opposed to the wooden chocks as seen on the previous engines. These feet will later be seated on a larger 12mm steel bracket for added strength and support. You'll be able to see the fabrication of these in later videos. With all three engines now in place, we can start to take measurements for the engine mount and where other components can be fitted, how pipes and hoses will be run, and plan the floor layout. Once all measurements have been taken, the engines will be lifted out again in order to make way for the shipwrights to reshape the engine beds.